She threw out the man who raised her, without knowing he had secretly made her a millionaire. When Ava demanded her adoptive father leave her house, calling him a burden, she never imagined the truth he'd been hiding for 25 years. As rain poured and bags sat on the porch, he walked away, with a letter in his coat pocket and a will worth $5 million. But the storm that followed wasn't outside, it was inside her heart. Ava stood in her pristine kitchen, her voice shaking not with sadness, but with frustration. "You need to go, Harold. This house isn't big enough for both of us." The man across from her didn't flinch. His weathered hands clutched a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. His eyes, tired but kind, watched her with quiet sorrow. He had raised her since she was 4, taught her to ride a bike, stayed up with her through fevers, and clapped the loudest at her college graduation. But today he was just an old man in her way. "I'm not asking for much, Ava," Harold said softly. "Just a room. A place to be near you. You had your chance," she snapped. "Now I need space for my life, for my future. You don't fit in it anymore." And so he packed one small bag, a raincoat, and a sealed letter he tucked deep in his inner pocket. Then he left, without another word, walking into a storm that matched the silence between them. Rain hammered down like judgment as Harold stepped off the porch. The drops soaked into his coat almost instantly, the cold seeping through to his skin. But he didn't stop walking. He didn't look back. Ava didn't watch him go either. She shut the door too quickly, as if afraid her resolve might crack. If she lingered, her house felt bigger now. Quieter, too quiet, but she told herself it was for the best. She had her career, her image, her space. Harold didn't belong in that picture anymore. Back in the shelter of her living room, she scrolled through social media, trying to lose herself in updates and promotions. Photos of friends, babies, and vacation snapshots from colleagues who called her inspiring. She told herself she'd done the right thing. Harold had been slowing down. He needed more care. She wasn't a nurse. She wasn't his keeper. She told herself all these things, and yet something gnawed at her deep inside. Something she shoved down harder every time it surfaced. Harold walked for nearly an hour through the city's rain-slicked streets, finally reaching a shelter on the south side. The old brick building wasn't much, but it was warm and dry, and the volunteers remembered his name. They always did. "Hey, Mr. Cole," one of them said, helping him with his bag. "Rain's wicked today. You okay?" He smiled gently and nodded. "Just a little wet, I'll dry." That night, Harold sat by the window in the common room, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears. He didn't cry. Not because he didn't feel hurt, he did, but because he had cried so many times before, in secret, over the years, that now all he had left was silence. He took out the sealed envelope from his coat pocket and held it in his hand. His name wasn't on it, only hers, Ava. He'd written it years ago, sealed and updated it every time something changed in his accounts. It contained the truth about everything: the savings, the insurance, the house he'd sold just to help pay for her education, the stocks quietly growing over the years. And it carried something deeper than money. It carried every sacrifice, every missed vacation, every night he'd stayed up worrying about her when she was in college, or dating the wrong guy, or chasing a promotion she didn't even want. And now, he was gone from her life with barely a word. Meanwhile, Ava's days returned to routine. She went to work, ran meetings, gave polished presentations. Clients called her brilliant, composed, forward-thinking. No one knew that at night, in the quiet dark of her spotless condo, she kept glancing at the hallway where Harold used to walk with his slippers scraping softly against the floor. She deleted the number from her phone. She told herself it was closure, but her fingers hovered over it before pressing the final button. He hadn't texted her, hadn't called. Maybe he didn't care, or maybe he did. Maybe he was waiting for her to do what he always did: at bridge the silence, forgive without words. Weeks passed. The guilt festered quietly like a wound beneath the skin, and then one afternoon the call came. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it ring out. Almost. "Miss Ava Raymond." The voice on the other end asked. "Yes, this is Jennings and Rourke Legal. I'm calling regarding the last will and testament of Mr. Harold Cole." The words echoed. Ava felt the blood drain from her face. What do you mean?" "I'm sorry to inform you Mr. Cole passed away last week, peacefully, at a shelter downtown. He named you as the sole beneficiary in his will. We need you to come by and sign some papers." And the room spun. She didn't hear the rest. She went to the firm the next day, her hands shaking. The whole cab ride, in the waiting room, surrounded by quiet hallways and ticking clocks, she replayed the last time she'd seen him, the hurt in his eyes, the way he didn't argue, the way he walked away. Mr. Jennings, the lawyer, was an older man with silver-framed glasses and a patient voice. "Mr. Cole left everything to you. The will includes a financial portfolio worth approximately $5 million, along with this letter." He handed her a slightly yellowed envelope, her name in Harold's neat handwriting on the front. She didn't open it there. She couldn't. She took it home, laid it on the coffee table, and stared at it like it might explode. Silence in her house was unbearable. She finally broke the seal at midnight. "Dear Ava, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. That's okay. I had a long life, longer than I expected. You were the best part of it. I know things ended badly between us, and I'm sorry I didn't come to you to be a burden. I came because I missed hearing your laughter in the mornings, because even grown-up daughters still need someone to tell them everything's going to be all right. You always were strong and smart. You didn't get that from me, but I'm proud I helped raise it in you. I sold the house when you got that scholarship, remember? You thought it was some miracle. It wasn't. It was love. Simple as that. I never needed thanks, I just wanted to see you soar. I hope you keep flying, but don't forget to land sometimes, to feel the ground, to look people in the eye when they say they love you. Not everyone will, but I always did. This money isn't a gift, it's a return. For every hug, every scraped knee, every I love you, Dad, that I'll never stop hearing. Be kind, Ava, to yourself, and maybe someday, forgive me for being old. Love, Dad. She wept, not softly, not politely, but the kind of weeping that empties something out of you as if part of your chest caves in and leaves only air. She hadn't said goodbye. She hadn't said thank you. She hadn't even said she loved him. She ran her hands over the letter again and again, tracing the edges like maybe they would bring him back. That week, Ava made decisions no one expected. She declined a promotion. She stopped going to cocktail parties with people who called her powerhouse. She took the money and started something Harold would have loved, the Harold home, a place for older men with no family, no support, and no one to call their own. She visited every week. She cooked, sometimes cleaned. She didn't make speeches. She just listened. One of the residents had eyes like Harold. Another hummed old jazz tunes in the morning. She smiled through tears more times than she could count. She never forgave herself completely. Some things leave marks, but she learned how to say thank you. She learned how to see what she once overlooked. And every year on the anniversary of his passing, she sat at that same kitchen table where she once told him to leave. Only now, a photo of Harold sat in a frame on the counter, watching her with the same quiet eyes. The letter stayed in her wallet, folded, worn, sacred, and every time she touched it, she whispered the words she never got to say: I'm sorry, I love you, thank you. And somewhere she liked to believe he heard her. Three weeks passed. Though Ava could hardly account for the days, they blurred together in a gray fog of routine early meetings, stale coffee, and the kind of silence that echoed too loudly in a home meant to feel like victory. Each night she returned to her high-rise apartment, where the windows stretched from floor to ceiling, giving her a panoramic view of a city she no longer felt part of. It was supposed to be everything she wanted: sleek lines, clean surfaces, total independence. But lately, the silence in that apartment felt like it had teeth. Harold hadn't called. Not once. No one had. Her phone, always buzzing with notifications, now seemed only to alert her of meetings and deliveries, never anything that touched her heart. She had blocked out the image of him standing in the rain, clutching his small duffel bag, his eyes not accusing but exhausted. She told herself he was fine, that maybe he had found an old friend, maybe even family, that he didn't need her, that he had chosen peace. But even that lie couldn't settle the gnawing ache inside her. So, when the phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon while she was staring absently at a report she had no interest in reading, she nearly let it go to voicemail. The number was unfamiliar. She didn't feel like being sold another vacation package or investment scheme, but some ache in her chest compelled her thumb to swipe the green icon: Miss Ava Raymond. The voice on the other end was firm but kind, professional in a way that made her sit up straighter. Her stomach tightened. Yes, I'm calling regarding the last will and testament of Harold Cole. Her blood turned cold. The room went quiet. What? I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Cole passed away last week, peacefully, in a shelter just outside of town. But that's not all. He left something behind. For you. Ava could barely breathe. She closed her eyes. Her chest felt as though it had collapsed. She hadn't expected this, not really. She had always assumed there would be time. Time to call him. Time to find him. Time to apologize, but time had taken him first. I understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What did he leave? He named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate, the lawyer said gently. He left you everything. His savings, a considerable investment portfolio, and a life insurance policy. All told, roughly $5 million. Ava felt dizzy. Her head spun, her hands suddenly damp with sweat. $5 million. Yes, he was meticulous with his finances, lived humbly, worked tirelessly, invested smartly. He left behind very specific instructions that you'd be contacted and given this letter. There was a pause. Would you be available to come by the office and collect it in person? Ava agreed, though she didn't remember how. The phone call ended, but the words kept echoing. He had passed, alone in a shelter. She had made him leave now. He had left her everything. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her couch, the city's glow casting shadows across the hardwood floor. She kept replaying his last moments in her mind, imagining him in a small cot, perhaps cold, maybe wondering if she'd ever reach out. The thought made her stomach twist. 3 days later, she found herself in the sterile, polished offices of Jennings and Rourke. The secretary offered her tea. She declined. Her fingers trembled as she signed the documents, barely absorbing the words. Sole heir unrestricted, no contest. And then the letter was placed in her hands, cream-colored, folded neatly. Her name written in Harold's careful, slanted handwriting. She clutched it as if it were a living thing. She didn't open it there. She waited, drove home in silence, walked through her front door with the same sense of unreality that follows a dream. She placed the letter on the counter and stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. It took hours before she finally peeled it open, her breath shallow, heart pounding. Dear Ava, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But don't be angry. I never raised you for thanks or glory. I just wanted you to grow wings, Avon. If they carried you far from me, you were my greatest treasure. And even when you pushed me away, I never stopped loving you, Dad. The ink blurred as her tears fell. Her knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, the letter clutched in both hands. Her breath came in sobs, ugly, broken sobs that ripped from somewhere deep and primal. The kind of crying that doesn't ask for sympathy. The kind that comes too late. In that moment, the silence in her house changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore, it was punishment. It filled every room, climbed the walls, choked the air. She thought about the times she'd slammed doors, rolled her eyes, walked away. About the time he spent waiting for her outside her school plays. The hours he worked double shifts so she could go to summer camp. The nights he stayed up when she was sick. The mornings he slipped notes into her lunchbox, even into her teenage years, when she pretended to hate them. And now he was gone. She hadn't even said goodbye. Ava sat on that kitchen floor until morning light began to seep through the windows. The letter never left her hands. The money, to her, felt like a curse. How could she accept it, knowing what she had done? How could she spend a single cent when she'd given him nothing at the end, not even kindness? But slowly, something changed. Grief has a way of sharpening the truth. In the days that followed, Ava began pulling out old boxes, digging through photo albums and scrapbooks Harold had kept hidden in the closet she'd never bothered to open. Pictures of her in pigtails, beaming with a missing front tooth. Tickets to her school events, each labeled with a date and a note like she was brilliant. There were letters she had written as a child, 2 crayon-scrolled declarations of love. You're the best daddy in the world. She had loved him once, purely, with no shame. When did she forget? Ava took a week off work. She didn't tell anyone why. She didn't even answer the calls from her boss or friends. Instead, she found herself visiting the shelter where Harold had spent his final days. The volunteers recognized his name immediately. One of them, a woman named Carla, took her aside. Your father was a kind soul, she said. Never complained. Always asked how we were doing. Ava's eyes brimmed again. He spoke about you, every day. Said he knew you were busy making a name for yourself. Said he was proud of you. Ava's chest ached. He said he hoped you'd remember the good times. That maybe one day, when you were ready, you'd come find him. But she never had. Back home, the money sat untouched in the account. But now Ava began thinking about what it could mean. Not for her, but for someone else. Someone like Harold. She began researching, visiting care homes, talking to directors, listening to residents, and then, without fully realizing it, she started building something. She called it the Harold Home. It was a haven for elderly men with no families, no support systems, those who had given their lives in service, in labor, in silence, only to be forgotten in their final years. The first home opened just outside the city, in a modest building with wide hallways, a garden, a music room, and a community kitchen. Ava was there every day. She painted walls, she carried boxes. She sat with the men and listened to their stories, and when they asked why she was doing it, she always gave the same answer. Because my father deserved this, and so do you. Every room had a small plaque in memory of Harold Cole, a father first. One evening a resident approached her. His name was Dennis. His hands were as worn as Harold's had been. He handed her a drawing, a sketch he'd made from memory. It was of a man holding the hand of a little girl with pigtails. This is how he described you, Dennis said. Even at the end, Ava took the drawing and cried. Years passed. More homes opened. She never became the executive director. She refused titles. She was just Ava to the residents, someone who showed up with cookies, with stories, with patience. She had her old apartment still, but it no longer felt like home. Her home was wherever the Harold homes were, where laughter echoed down long halls, where kindness was currency, where love was spoken in small, everyday things. She never touched the rest of the money for herself. She wore the same coat year after year, drove the same car, ate the same simple meals. But in her wallet, behind her ID, was the letter worn, softened at the folds. Sacred. And every year, on the date of his passing, she went to the bench in the park where he used to take her when she was small. She brought flowers, sat in silence, and whispered the words that had once gone unsaid. I'm sorry. I love you. Thank you. And every year, as the wind stirred through the trees, she liked to believe he heard her, maybe not with ears, but with the same quiet heart that had once carried her, year after year, through a life she hadn't realized was built entirely on his love. She stood at his favorite bench in the park, a bouquet in her hand, the letter tucked against her chest. Children played nearby, just as she once had when he used to bring her here after school. The swing creaked in the distance, the sun filtered softly through the trees, and the bench, old, weathered, and faithful, looked exactly as it always had, except now it held only memories. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I thought I was grown. I thought I didn't need you." She sat down slowly, placing the bouquet beside her. The letter was still folded in her hand, its edges worn from too many rereads. She didn't need to open it. Every word was branded into her mind like scripture. That last paragraph, "You were my greatest treasure, and even when you pushed me away, I never stopped loving you," echoed louder in her head than any playground noise around her. The ache in her chest wasn't something time would erase. It wasn't sharp like guilt, it was hollow, like space left behind after something vital had been removed. She had everything she once thought she needed: a career, a home, recognition. But now she understood how empty it all was without the man who gave her everything and asked for nothing. Ava didn't cry that day, not the way she had when she first read the letter. That kind of grief had burned through her already. What remained now was quieter, like an undercurrent, deep and cold. She stayed at the bench for hours. She watched the children laugh, the mothers call them back with outstretched hands, the elderly man feeding pigeons a few steps away. The world was still turning, still blooming and falling apart in ordinary ways. But his chair back in her apartment, in the corner he used to sit and read, and at the Herald home where she now worked, remained empty. That emptiness was part of her now. It moved with her, a quiet companion, as steady as her breath. A few months earlier, when the inheritance papers were signed and the accounts transferred into her name, Ava didn't hesitate. She hadn't hesitated a second. Not because the money didn't matter, but because she knew exactly what it needed to become. Not a legacy of wealth, but a legacy of care. She donated every cent of it to a project she knew he would have poured his soul into if he had the means. She called it the Herald Home, a shelter and community center for elderly men like him. Men who were often left behind by the same world they helped build. Men who weren't flashy or loud, who didn't demand attention but gave their entire lives in quiet service to their families, to their work, to love they rarely spoke of but always demonstrated. The Herald home wasn't luxurious, but it was warm. It had bookshelves in every room, soft lights, a garden where the men could plant herbs and vegetables, a piano in the common area that one resident named Walt played every Sunday afternoon. Ava made sure of all of it. She visited every week, often twice, not as a donor, not as a figurehead, but as someone who scrubbed dishes, changed sheets, and listened. The first man she met there, Ernest, had gray eyes and shaky hands but told the funniest stories about driving a cab in New York in the 70s. She laughed with him until her stomach hurt. He called her kid and she let him, and when he passed away 2 years later, she cried like she had lost family. Then there was Mike Atoll, silent and always watching. He didn't speak for the first month she knew him, but one afternoon, after she brought in a fresh batch of banana bread, Harold's favorite, he tapped her wrist and whispered, "Thank you for remembering people like us." Ava had never told the men her full story. She didn't need to. Somehow they felt it. They saw the love in her gestures, in the way she smoothed out their blankets or refilled their tea without asking. They recognized the regret in her eyes, too, the sorrow she carried but didn't wallow in. In each of them, she saw pieces of Harold, a hand gesture, a laugh, a quiet moment watching the rain. But still, his chair remained empty. There was one room at the Harold homeroom to be. She'd asked for it to be designed with a view of the garden, a rocking chair in the corner. His old weathered bookshelf she'd taken from the storage unit he once kept. On its shelves were all his books, The Old Man and the Sea, Of Mice and Men, and dozens more with his scribbled notes in the margins. She never sat in that chair. No one did. It stayed open, untouched, sacred. Every Thursday afternoon, she sat in the room across the hall and wrote letters she never sent. To Harold, to herself, to the girl she used to be, the one who thought adulthood meant being alone, the one who thought strength meant silence, the one who thought needing someone was weakness. Those letters filled a wooden box beneath her bed, and yet, she lived, she grew. Grief didn't stop her from loving it, taught her how. In time, the community around the Harold home grew too. Volunteers from local colleges, high schoolers coming in for service hours who ended up staying just to hear the stories. Neighbors brought over homemade meals. Nurses from nearby hospitals stopped by after shifts. It became more than a shelter. It became a village. On the anniversary of Harold's death, Ava organized a quiet evening of remembrance. Not a formal event, just a table in the courtyard with candles and photo albums. She brought out his favorite jazz records and played them low in the background. Residents shared memories not just of their own lives, but of Harold, even though they'd never met him. They spoke of men like him, of fathers and brothers and grandfathers who had done what needed to be done and were forgotten anyway. Ava stood by, heart full, eyes wide, listening. She didn't say much, but at the end, she read a poem she had written, a tribute to the man who taught her that love isn't always loud, that parenting is sometimes invisible, that presence is the deepest kind of poetry. The poem ended with a line she had whispered countless times: "I thought I didn't need you, but all I ever needed was what you gave me, quiet, constant love." That night, she sat in room 2B for the first time. The garden outside glowed under the porch light. She pulled Harold's favorite blanket across her knees and leaned back in the rocking chair. She didn't cry. She smiled. The ache was still there, but now it lived beside peace, and years continued to pass. The Harold home expanded to a second location across town, then a third in another city. Donors appeared, strangers who'd heard Ava's story through whispers and word of mouth. She was invited to speak on podcasts, even at conferences, but she never sought fame. Every time she spoke, she told only one story, not of money, but of missed moments, and how we rebuild from the ruins of our regret. She wasn't perfect. There were days she felt hollow again. Days she stood outside room 2B and couldn't bring herself to enter. Days when her hands shook as she read his letter, as if she was reading it for the first time. But she kept going, because the greatest lesson Harold ever taught her was this: love doesn't vanish. It transforms. It moves from person to person, gesture to gesture, small act to small act. It lives in soup bowls handed gently to trembling hands. It lives in birthday cards written by volunteers to men who had forgotten their own birthdays. It lives in the smile of a once broken man who now reads bedtime stories to the children of a staff member after dinner. It lived in the rooms of the Harold home. It lived in her. And one day, when Ava was older, her hair silvered, her steps slower, sat at the same park bench again. The trees were taller now. The playground had been replaced with something more modern. But the bench remained. She brought no flowers this time, just herself and the letter. Always the letter. She sat quietly, letting the breeze move through her hair. A child ran past, laughing. A father chased after him. She smiled. She whispered again, barely audible, "Thank you, Dad. I see it now. I see everything." And she looked beside her, not expecting a vision or a ghost, but somehow, for a moment, she felt warmth where the sun hadn't yet reached. His chair, in her heart, would never be empty again.